A world you no longer belong in. The words, spoken by my own daughter on her wedding day, hung in the air like a death sentence. It wasn't just a casual jab, it was a public declaration of my irrelevance, a brutal dismissal of a lifetime of work. Her smile, radiant for everyone else, held a cold, dismissive flicker as she looked at me. You might expect me to have stormed out, humiliated, or to have erupted in a furious tirade, but I did neither. I simply smiled, a quiet, knowing smile, because I knew the true game wasn't over yet. Her final wedding gift, a surprise I had planned for months, was waiting, and with it, she would learn that the world she so eagerly claimed as her own was a world I still controlled, and a world she would never truly belong to without my blessing. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and let me know where you're listening from in the comments. The scene was perfect, a picture I thought only existed in dreams. Enormous crystal chandeliers hung suspended from the vaulted ceiling of the banquet hall, scattering a warm, golden light over hundreds of guests in their splendid attire. The air was thick with the scent of lavender and white roses, a delicate combination that Rachel herself had chosen. She always had impeccable taste. I smiled, a rare smile untouched by worry. From my position at the head table, the place of honor, I could survey the entire room. I watched Jake, my new son-in-law, dapper in his bespoke suit, moving with a radiant smile from table to table, greeting everyone. My gaze then settled on my daughter, Rachel. The heart of this 62-year-old father seemed to skip a beat. She looked like an angel descended to earth in her pure white wedding gown, her chestnut hair swept up in an elegant chignon that revealed the graceful line of her neck and her soft, bare shoulders. Her smile lit up the entire corner of the room, a smile I had spent a lifetime cultivating and protecting. A warm, powerful wave of pride swelled in my chest. I had done it. After all these years, I had done it. I remembered the days following my bitter divorce, when Rachel was just an 8-year-old girl. My ex-wife had left to pursue a different life, leaving me with our little daughter, whose eyes were always wide with confusion and fear. There were times I thought I wouldn't make it. The burden of being both a father and a mother, the financial pressure, the hollow loneliness in a house without a woman's presence. I had turned down promotions that required relocation, brushed aside budding personal relationships, all to ensure that Rachel's world wouldn't be shaken any further. Every paycheck, every hour of overtime was for her, so she could attend the best schools, take every enrichment class she desired, so she would never feel like she was lacking compared to her friends. And now, watching my daughter so happy beside the man she loved, at a lavish wedding that I myself had largely paid for, I knew that every sacrifice had been worth it. But beneath that happiness, there was an undercurrent that no one in this room, not even Rachel, could see. It was my secret world, the world named DT Enterprises. After taking an early retirement, instead of choosing a life of leisure, I had thrown myself into a new adventure. I used my entire life's savings, along with the experience accumulated over 40 years in the business world, to quietly build a private equity firm. It wasn't a hobby, not a personal project, to kill time, as Rachel thought. It was my heart and soul, my legacy, my way of fighting against the terrifying silence of old age and proving that a man's worth doesn't end the day he receives his pension. DT Enterprises was growing by leaps and bounds, with acquisition deals that, if revealed, would send shockwaves through the industry. But I had never told Rachel about its true scale. I just wanted her to see a stable father, a peaceful harbor. My discretion had inadvertently created a wall. She didn't understand why I was so busy. She assumed I was using work to escape, to isolate myself from my own daughter. And then the memory of the phone call from 3 weeks ago flooded back, as vivid as if it were yesterday. Her voice on the phone that day was both pleading and angry. "Dad, you can't postpone it?" "Just for one afternoon. This is my wedding dress. It's the most important fitting." My heart had ached. The image of my little princess standing alone in a bridal shop made my chest tighten. But on my end of the line, my business partner had flown halfway across the world from Singapore just for this final signing. It was a foundational contract, a deal that would elevate DT Enterprises to a new level, ensuring a solid future not just for me, but for Rachel and her new family as well. I had to choose. "I'm sorry, Princess," I had said, my voice hoarse. "I promise I'll make it up to you." "Anything you want." The long silence on the other end was heavier than 1,000 words of blame. Finally, she just said, "Whatever, Dad," and hung up. I knew I had hurt my daughter. A pang of guilt crept in, but I still believed I had done the right thing. The future sometimes demands sacrifices in the present. I told myself that after the wedding I would find a way to explain everything to her. The gentle clinking of a glass pulled me from my thoughts. The groom, Jake, was standing on the stage, looking sharp and confident. He took the microphone, smiling at Rachel, a smile brimming with love. "To my beautiful wife," Jake began, and the entire hall fell silent, listening. "From the first day I met you, I knew I had found my other half. You're intelligent, funny, and have a kinder heart than anyone I've ever known." Jake's speech was sweet and sincere. He thanked both families, thanked the friends who had come to celebrate with them. When he mentioned me, his voice was full of respect. "And I would like to extend a special thanks to David. Thank you, sir, for raising such a wonderful woman. I promise to care for and love Rachel for the rest of my life." I nodded, applauding with everyone else. The young man's promise warmed my heart. After him, it was the groomsmen's turn, Jake's best friends. They told hilarious stories from their college days about wild road trips, sending waves of laughter through the hall. The atmosphere of the party was wonderful, joyful, warm, and filled with love. Everything seemed like it couldn't be more perfect. I took a sip of wine, feeling the tension in my chest slowly dissolve. Perhaps I had been worrying too much. The small crack from that phone call seemed to have been mended by the immense happiness of today. Rachel was laughing. She was happy. That was all that mattered. I believed the rest of the evening would pass peacefully, and the misunderstandings would be left behind. That warm, perfect atmosphere didn't last long. Right after the groomsmen finished their speeches, Amy, the maid of honor and Rachel's best friend from college, stepped onto the stage. She looked lovely in her lavender dress, a radiant smile on her face. I'd known Amy since she was a little kid who used to come over and raid our fridge. I always thought of her as a second daughter. "Hello again, everyone," she said, her voice clear and full of excitement. "For those who don't know me, I'm Amy, and I've had the great fortune of being best friends with our beautiful bride for the last 15 years. The room filled with applause. Amy told a few charming jokes about their student days, about all-nighters studying for exams, about silly heartbreaks. The mood was light. I smiled. "But today," Amy continued, her tone turning more mischievous, "I want to talk a little bit about family, the people who made our wonderful Rachel who she is today. And of course we can't forget the man of the hour." "No, not you, Jake. You can sit down," she teased, making the whole room chuckle. "I'm talking about the father of the bride, Mr. David." All eyes turned to me. I gave a slight nod, the smile still on my face, but a sense of unease began to creep in. "David is a wonderful man, but lately he's found himself a new passion," Amy said, deliberately making air quotes with her fingers. A few giggles rippled through the crowd. I could see Rachel. She was chuckling, her cheeks flushed from the champagne. We like to joke that it's the entrepreneur's version of a midlife crisis. The laughter grew a little louder. That cold, sinking feeling began to worm its way into my chest, but I forced myself to maintain a calm expression. It's just a joke, I told myself. Kids joke like this all the time. At an age when he should be spending his time fishing or gardening, Amy went on, clearly pleased with her own humor, our David here decided to dive into the cutthroat world of startups. Instead of playing with his future grandchildren, he's busy in meetings with, who knows, his imaginary investors, probably. This time, laughter erupted from several tables. I glanced at my daughter. She was laughing, clinking glasses with the friend next to her, a mischievous glint in her eyes. My heart sank. She didn't see anything wrong with this joke. Rachel tells me all the time, Amy added, as if sharing a huge secret, that he's glued to his laptop these days, probably building his own little empire. Emboldened by the alcohol and the crowd's encouragement, Rachel suddenly stood up, her wine glass still in hand. Amy's right, everyone, she chimed in, her voice a little slurred, but loud enough for the room to hear. My dad is super busy these days, super-duper busy. The resentment in her words was masked by a smile, but I heard it, as clear and painful as a knife's edge. So busy he didn't even have time to go wedding dress shopping with his own daughter. A brief silence fell over the room, then it erupted into an even bigger wave of laughter. Everyone thought it was a planned part of the speech, a cute little jab between a father and daughter. But to me, every laugh was like a needle pricking at my pride. I guess that $1 million deal just couldn't wait, Rachel added, shrugging dramatically. Can you all imagine? Little old me, standing in a sea of gorgeous wedding dresses, surrounded by my aunts and friends, but the one person whose smile I wanted to see, the one person I wanted to ask, Daddy, do I look like a princess? Was off somewhere, signing $1 million deal that was probably to supply golf clubs to some senior citizens club. I sat there, frozen. She had turned my pain and my sacrifice into a cheap joke. $1 million deal. If she knew the truth, she would never have said those words. That deal wasn't just for $1 million. It was the future. It was the security for her own life down the road. Rachel wasn't finished. It seemed that all her pent-up feelings had found an outlet in the wine and the attention of the crowd. She was no longer just talking about my absence. She was talking about me as a person. My dad always says, I'm doing this for your future. But Dad, she looked directly at me, her tone shifting from petulant to a kind of condescending pity. It's time we got realistic. Some dreams have an expiration date. When you're over 60, maybe it's time to accept the reality of what you can achieve. The entire room went quiet. The laughter had died. Now there was only curiosity. People could sense this was no longer a joke. I'm saying this because I love you, Rachel continued, her voice dripping with false sincerity. Jake and I just don't want you to be disappointed when this little startup bubble bursts. We're just trying to get you to accept that it's time to rest, to live according to your age, instead of trying to compete with people your age in a world you no longer belong in. I could feel the blood rush to my face. A world you no longer belong in. She was publicly declaring that I was washed up, that my efforts were futile and embarrassing. I glanced at Jake's table. He and his colleagues were nodding along, amused smirks on their faces. They were enjoying the show. We still support your hobby, Rachel said, the way she emphasized the word hobby making my skin crawl. even if it means having to listen to you talk about client meetings and business strategies as if you were the CEO of a major corporation." Amy, sensing the tension, quickly tried to smooth things over. "But come on," she said loudly, trying to reignite the laughter. "We still love David and his little company. At least it keeps him busy, so he doesn't have time to be a difficult father-in-law. Right, Jake?" Jake laughed loudly and gave Amy a thumbs up, an act that was like pouring gasoline on a fire. By now, I could feel the shift in the room. The laughter was gone, replaced by whispers and pitying glances. I could see the sympathetic shakes of the head. I overheard a whisper from the next table. "Poor guy, so delusional," and "The girl has a point. He's old. He should just rest. Why make things so difficult for himself?" And perhaps Rachel sensed it too. She suddenly fell silent. Maybe it was the disapproving look from an older guest, or maybe, finally, she truly looked at me. She no longer saw an entrepreneur dad being teased. She saw me, her father, the man who sold his most beloved vintage car to pay for her study abroad, the one who had passed up countless dates so he could stay home and watch movies with her every Friday night. The man whose smile had completely vanished, replaced by a stoic mask hiding a profound wound. She saw that the wrinkles around my eyes weren't just from age, but from long nights of worry, from long days of hard work. The alcohol seemed to burn off in an instant, replaced by a late-dawning horror. The smile on her face vanished. What had she done? This was her father, and she had just made him the butt of a joke at her own wedding, in front of hundreds of people. A wave of regret rose, bitter in her throat. "Amy," Rachel called out softly, but her voice was too small, lost in the noise of the room. She gave a slight, almost imperceptible shake of her head, trying to signal her friend to stop. "That's enough." But it was too late. Amy was on a roll, completely oblivious to Rachel's change in demeanor. "Anyway," Amy concluded her speech with a final punchline, "congratulations to Rachel and Jake. And here's to David's empire, hopefully selling its first handicraft on Etsy soon." A final round of laughter, followed by polite but somewhat strained applause. Amy stepped down from the stage cheerfully, completely unaware that she had just lit the fuse to a bomb. But in that moment, a strange silence enveloped my table. The joyful atmosphere had evaporated, leaving only the simmering pain of a father betrayed by the daughter he loved most, and the late regret of a daughter who suddenly realized she had gone too far. When Amy stepped off the stage, that strange silence clung to my table. It wasn't the normal lull between speeches. It was a heavy, suffocating silence, as if the air in the room had suddenly thickened. The soft jazz music had started up again, a gentle melody that should have been relaxing, but it couldn't seem to penetrate the invisible wall of awkwardness surrounding me. The relatives at my table, who just minutes before had been happily chatting about upcoming vacations and showing off pictures of their grandchildren, were now staring intently at their plates as if they held the greatest secrets of the universe. They avoided my gaze at all costs. I had become the awkward subject, the pitiful old man who had just been publicly shamed by his own daughter on her wedding day. The initial pain, sharp as a cut, had now subsided, replaced by a hollow, bone-deep exhaustion. I wasn't angry at Amy. She was just an impulsive kid who always wanted to be the center of attention. I couldn't even truly be angry at Rachel. I just felt a profound sadness, the bitter failure of a father who couldn't make his daughter understand or respect him. Maybe Rachel was right. Maybe I had been too absorbed in numbers, contracts, and acquisition strategies that I'd forgotten how to be a father, forgotten that what she needed wasn't a secure future, but my presence. I took a deep breath, trying to push down the nausea rising in my throat. I was about to quietly stand up, make an excuse about going to the restroom, and then walk straight to the parking lot and drive home. I couldn't bear another second of it. I wanted to return to the familiar solitude of my apartment, the only place I wasn't being judged. But just as I pushed my chair back, a tall figure stopped by my table, blocking the light from the crystal chandelier. It was a man in his 50s, wearing an expensive, perfectly tailored suit, exuding an undeniable air of confidence and power. I recognized him. Robert Anderson, the newly appointed CEO of Sterling Corp., my son-in-law's new boss. He was a well-known figure in the business world, a man nicknamed the Shark for his bold deals. "Mr. Thompson," he said, his voice deep and respectful, a stark contrast to what I had just endured. He extended his hand. "I'm Robert Anderson. I don't believe we've been formally introduced." I was surprised, but I politely stood and shook his hand. His grip was firm and decisive. "David Thompson. A pleasure to meet you, Mr. Anderson. Congratulations on my daughter's wedding." "It's a wonderful ceremony," he said, his eyes studying me, but there was absolutely no pity in them. It was the look of one peer assessing another. "I'm truly impressed." Just then, Jake, my son-in-law, hurried over, a slightly panicked look on his face at seeing his boss talking to me, as if he was afraid I'd say something to tarnish his image. "Mr. Anderson, I didn't realize you were going to greet my father-in-law. This is a great honor." Then he turned to me, draping an arm over my shoulder with a casualness that felt forced. His hand was heavy on my shoulder. "This is my father-in-law. A great guy. He's just got a few projects that are a bit time-consuming lately." Jake said it with a wide grin, trying to be funny and play along with the earlier teasing, thinking he was scoring points with his boss by showing he was a laid-back son-in-law who didn't take things too seriously. "Oh, please don't mind what Amy and Rachel said earlier," Jake continued, still not noticing that Mr. Anderson's expression had begun to turn cold. "It's just my father-in-law's cute little hobby. A way to kill time so he doesn't get bored in his old age. We're always supportive of his little company." "Little company?" Mr. Anderson repeated, his voice devoid of any warmth. It dropped low, carrying a sharp edge that seemed to freeze the air around us. The way he looked at Jake sent a shiver down my spine. It wasn't the look of a boss at an employee, but of a predator at a foolish prey that had just walked into a trap. Jake remained completely oblivious to the danger. His ignorance was astonishing. "Yes, sir, some kind of business consulting thing. He helps a few local shops with their paperwork, that sort of thing. It's quite admirable for someone his age to still want to try, isn't it, sir?" He even winked at his boss. I could see a struggle in Mr. Anderson's eyes. He looked at me, then at Jake, then around the room where the whispers about the delusional father had not yet ceased. He took a deep breath, his jaw tightening slightly. I could see the shock, the disbelief, and even a flicker of anger in his eyes. He wasn't angry with me. He was angry for me. As the head of a major corporation, he understood better than anyone the value of reputation and respect. For one of his subordinates to be so condescending and ignorant as to insult a figure of stature right in front of him was unacceptable. Moreover, he was a businessman. He knew who I was. Maybe not every detail, but the name D. Thompson of DT Enterprises was certainly not foreign to him. "Jake," Mr. Anderson said, his voice slow and cold as ice, each word a frozen shard. "I don't think you understand who you're talking to." Then he gave me one last look, a direct, searching gaze, as if asking for permission. In that instant, a silent understanding passed between us. I said nothing, just gave a slow, deliberate nod. I was tired of hiding, of playing the role of a harmless old man. If the truth had to come out, let it be revealed by someone with the authority and power to do it. And I think, Mr. Anderson continued, his voice a little louder now, drawing the attention of nearby tables, that there is a serious misunderstanding here that needs to be cleared up. With that, to my and Jake's utter astonishment, he turned and strode purposefully toward the stage. People parted to let him pass. The party's MC, seeing an important guest approaching, quickly handed the microphone to Mr. Anderson. He took it, his posture straight and commanding. The entire hall, which had been buzzing with noise, fell silent. Everyone was curious to see what the powerful CEO had to say. "Pardon the interruption," Mr. Anderson said loudly, his voice echoing through the silent space. "I'm Robert Anderson, the groom's boss. I won't take up much of your time, but I cannot continue to enjoy this celebration when all of us, myself included, have shown a profound lack of respect for the father of the bride." I saw Rachel and Jake exchange a look, their faces beginning to pale. She was completely sober now, her eyes wide with bewilderment. "We laughed about Mr. David's midlife crisis, about what we called his little company," Mr. Anderson continued, his sharp gaze sweeping across the room. "We treated him like a pitiable old man trying to find a harmless hobby. But the truth is, we were mistaken, gravely mistaken." He paused for a second, letting his words sink in. "The man we just ridiculed," Mr. Anderson's voice grew steely, "is, in fact, D. Thompson, the founder and chairman of DT Enterprises." A gasp of astonishment rippled through the hall. I saw a few business guests at the front tables look at each other in disbelief. Some even pulled out their phones, probably to check the information. DT Enterprises, the name I had always kept private, was now announced. "DT Enterprises is not a hobby," Mr. Anderson emphasized. "It is one of the most successful and discreet private equity firms in our industry, a true shark that many corporations, including my own Sterling Corp., are wary of." The whispers had now become a shockwave. I could see Jake's face had gone as white as a sheet, beads of sweat forming on his forehead. "And one more thing?" He looked directly at Rachel and Jake, his gaze unflinching. "That $1 million deal the bride resentfully mentioned, the reason Mr. David missed the wedding dress fitting, was the strategic partnership contract between Sterling Corp. And DT Enterprises, a deal valued not at 1, but at 9 figures. A deal that I personally had to leverage every connection and effort for the past 6 months just to get a signing appointment." The silence in the room was now so thick I could hear my own heart pounding in my chest. Mr. David could have easily canceled that meeting. He could have made me wait for months. But he didn't, because he is a professional. And tonight, ladies and gentlemen, he sat here, quietly enduring our ridicule and ignorance, just so he wouldn't spoil the happy day of the daughter he loves with all his heart, Mr. Anderson concluded. "Mr. Thompson, on behalf of everyone here, I would like to offer you my sincerest apologies and my deepest respect." Mr. Anderson put the microphone down. For a moment the whole room held its breath. Then a round of applause broke out, hesitant at first, then growing louder, more thunderous. It wasn't applause for a speech. It was applause of admiration, of regret, and even a little bit of fear. The same people who had looked at me with pity were now looking at me with awe. I looked over at Jake. He looked like he'd been struck by lightning. He was unsteady on his feet, his hands gripping the back of a chair, his mouth agape but unable to form a sound. The bright future he had envisioned seemed to be crumbling before his very eyes. His entire career at Sterling Corp. Now depended entirely on the mercy of the father-in-law he had just publicly mocked. But the person I was really watching was Rachel. She stood frozen beside her husband, her hands covering her mouth, the champagne flute having fallen unnoticed to the carpet. Tears began to stream down her beautiful face, but this time they weren't tears of happiness. They were tears of shame, of shock, and of utter remorse. The picture of the washed-up, pitiable father she had painted in her mind had just been torn to shreds. In its place was the image of a giant, a man she had never truly known, had never truly tried to know. Every condescending word, every dismissive action over the past 2 years now came back to haunt her like a nightmare. Her wedding reception had turned into a public stage where her illusions and shortcomings were laid bare. And I, the forgotten father, had suddenly become the center of everyone's attention. The joyous atmosphere was completely gone, leaving only a raw truth and a costly lesson my daughter would never be able to forget. The applause finally died down, but the silence it left behind was more resonant than the sound itself. The party, technically, continued. The band started playing some instrumental piece, and the waitstaff still moved about clearing tables, but the soul of the party was dead. There was no more hearty laughter, no more lively conversations. Instead, a heavy, suffocating cloud of awkwardness had settled over the room. People spoke to each other in whispers, their eyes constantly darting towards me, Jake, and Rachel, as if we were the main characters in a tragedy that had just reached its conclusion. The change in people's attitude towards me was dizzying and absurd. Relatives who had avoided my gaze earlier now crowded around, clapping me on the shoulder and saying things like, "I knew you had it in you," or "I always believed in you." A few guests who were minor business partners, people who hadn't even bothered to greet me before, now approached my table with beaming faces, trying to press their business cards into my hand and talk about potential collaboration opportunities. Their hypocrisy made me sick to my stomach. Power truly is a strange lens. It makes people see things they previously refused to acknowledge. I paid them almost no mind. My eyes were focused on the 2 young people standing at the center of the storm. Jake looked like a walking corpse. His face was ashen, his shirt soaked with sweat despite the cool air conditioning. He had tried to approach me twice, stammering some meaningless apology, but I just ignored him. I had nothing to say to him right now. His career, his future, that was between him and Mr. Anderson. My problem was much deeper, much more personal. And then I saw my daughter. Rachel stood there, resplendent in a wedding dress that now seemed utterly out of place. Her perfect makeup was streaked with tears, leaving black trails on her beautiful cheeks. She wasn't sobbing, but silent tears rolled down her face, ceaselessly. The small tiara in her hair was askew, looking pathetic. She didn't look like a happy bride, but like a princess deposed from her own kingdom. The party slowly wound down. Guests began to leave, coming to say goodbye to me with a newfound deference before they departed. Finally, only family and the closest friends remained. Jake, after being pulled aside by his parents for a tense conversation, approached Rachel and whispered something in her ear. She nodded mechanically. It was time for them to leave, to start a honeymoon that no one likely had the heart to enjoy anymore. Before reaching the door, Rachel stopped. She took a deep breath, as if summoning all her courage, then turned and walked towards me. Jake moved to follow, but she shook her head. This was between us. She stood before me, a distance of only a few feet that felt like a chasm. She couldn't look me in the eye. Her gaze was fixed on the floor, her hands twisting the now wilting bridal bouquet. Her small shoulders trembled. The silence stretched on. I said nothing. I just stood there, looking at the daughter I had spent my entire life loving and protecting. I saw her not as a CEO looking at someone who had made a mistake, but as a father looking at his broken child. Love swelled within me, as fierce as ever, but this time it was mixed with a deep pain and an unspeakable disappointment. Finally, she looked up, her red, swollen eyes finally meeting mine. "Dad." Her voice was hoarse and broken. I quote. She couldn't finish the sentence. A sob caught in her throat, and fresh tears welled up. "I'm sorry," she whispered, a faint confession in the nearly empty hall. I didn't answer right away. I let the apology hang in the air between us. I wanted her to understand the weight of what had happened. This wasn't a small mistake that could be brushed aside with a simple phrase. This was a deep wound, a fracture in trust. After a moment, I let out a soft sigh. The anger had faded, leaving only sadness. "We'll talk when you get back, Rachel," I said, my voice even, not angry, but also devoid of any warmth. It was distant, a distance I knew would hurt her more than any scolding. Rachel flinched at the sound of my voice. She nodded hopelessly, tears still streaming. She knew, just as I knew, that the bridge between us had been broken, and rebuilding it would take more than a hurried apology. She turned and walked with heavy steps toward her husband, who was waiting at the door. They left, disappearing into the night. I stood alone in the desolate banquet hall, amidst the wilting lilies and white roses. My little princess's wedding was over, and I suddenly realized the real storm had only just begun. A week passed, the longest week of my life. I tried to work, tried to bury myself in the numbers and charts as I usually did, but this time they offered no comfort, no escape. The image of Rachel's tear-streaked face in her wedding dress haunted me, in meetings, during my solitary meals, and in my fitful sleep. Her faint apology echoed in my ears, a sound both pitiful and heartbreaking. Their honeymoon must have been a week of torture. I didn't call, didn't text. I gave her space, and I gave myself time for the anger to cool, for the pain to subside, and for a father's love to find its way back to its rightful place. I knew I couldn't let things stay this way. This silence, if it stretched on, would become an unbridgeable abyss. On a Saturday afternoon, I drove to Rachel and Jake's new house. It was a lovely home in the suburbs that I had helped them purchase with a significant sum. As I stood at their door, a strange feeling washed over me. I had been here many times before, but this time I felt like a stranger, an unwelcome bringer of discomfort. Jake was the one who opened the door. He looked haggard, thinner and paler than I'd ever seen him. His usual confident, energetic demeanor was gone, replaced by an anxious, fearful air. "Dad," he mumbled, his head bowed, unable to look me in the eye. "Please, please come in." I stepped inside. The house still smelled of fresh paint, the furniture neatly arranged, but the atmosphere was incredibly heavy. Rachel was curled up on the sofa, clutching a pillow. She was wearing baggy loungewear, her hair in a messy bun. She looked small and fragile. "Hello, sweetheart," I said, my voice calm. "Dad," Rachel whispered, her eyes red. Jake quickly interjected, "Sir, again, I am so sorry." I was an idiot. I didn't know what I was saying. I quote. I held up my hand, cutting him off. "Jake, your issues and your career are for you to sort out with Mr. Anderson. I don't care about that. I'm here today to talk to my daughter. Alone." My words were cold and final. Jake swallowed hard, his face paling. He looked to Rachel for help, but she just shook her head. After a moment's hesitation, he slunk upstairs, leaving the two of us alone. I sat down in the armchair opposite Rachel, keeping a safe distance. Silence enveloped us, broken only by the ticking of the wall clock. I looked at her, the daughter I had once held in my arms, the child who used to chatter endlessly about her day at school. How had we gotten here? Finally, I was the one who spoke. I didn't start with blame. "How was your honeymoon?" Rachel flinched at my unexpected question. It it was okay." She was lying, I knew. I sighed. "Rachel, what happened at the wedding was a huge mistake. A terrible mistake." She shrank back, bracing for the fury she thought was coming. "On your part," I continued, "and on mine." Rachel's head snapped up, her eyes wide with astonishment. "I was too obsessed with work," I said slowly, choosing my words carefully. "After your mother and I divorced, I didn't know what to do. I was scared. I was scared I wouldn't be able to give you a good enough life. I was scared of being lonely. So I ran away into my work. It became my lifeline, my safe haven. I thought that as long as I made enough money, as long as I made sure you had everything, that would be enough. I was wrong. I built a wall around myself thinking it would protect us both, but it only ended up separating us." Tears began to roll down Rachel's cheeks, but this time they weren't tears of shame, but of understanding. "I didn't share my struggles with you. I didn't let you see me when I was weak. I tried to be a perfect father, but I ended up being a distant one." I looked directly into her eyes, my voice filled with all my love and regret. "No matter how old you are, no matter that you're married, you will always be my little princess. And a father's responsibility is to help his child recognize and fix her mistakes, as well as to admit his own. The bridge between us is broken, Rachel. Let's rebuild it together." How do we do that?" Her voice trembled. "We'll go see a family therapist together," I proposed, "not to blame each other, but to learn how to talk to each other again, to learn how to listen, to learn how to forgive, for you and for me." Rachel looked at me, sheer surprise on her face. She had probably prepared for a lecture, for a punishment, not for an offer like this. It wasn't a command, it was an invitation to heal together. After a long moment of silence, she nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay, Dad." The therapist's office was bright and quiet, but for Rachel and me during that first session, it felt as suffocating as a sealed box. We sat across from each other, with Dr. Ann, a middle-aged woman with kind, patient eyes, between us. The silence was excruciating. Neither of us knew where to begin. Finally, I spoke, telling the story from my perspective. I didn't talk about the success of DT Enterprises, but about the loneliness after the divorce, about the feeling of helplessness watching my daughter grow up without her mother. I admitted to using work as an anesthetic, a way to prove my own worth when I felt I had failed as a husband. When I finished, Rachel was still silent. Dr. Ann gently asked, "Rachel, how do you feel hearing your father's words?" And then, like a dam breaking, Rachel began to talk. She cried, sobbing like a child. She spoke of feeling abandoned, of always having to compete with Dad's work for my attention. She talked about her envy of friends who had normal dads, fathers who had time to take them to the park, to attend parent-teacher conferences. "I never hated your work," she sobbed. "I just hated feeling like it was more important than me. The night before the dress fitting, I stayed up all night, imagining you smiling and saying, 'My daughter is so beautiful.' But then you called, and it felt like my whole world collapsed. I felt so stupid for having hoped. The anger, the hurt, it just kept building. And at the wedding, after I'd had too much to drink, it all came out." In the following sessions, we peeled back the layers of our complicated relationship. I learned that what Rachel needed wasn't money or material things, but my time and my attention. She learned that behind my cold, distant exterior was a heart that was always turned towards her, no matter how clumsy and misguided my expressions of love were. During one session, Dr. Ann asked us to switch roles. I had to voice Rachel's feelings, and she had to voice my thoughts. It was an incredibly difficult but enlightening moment. For the first time, I truly felt the depth of her pain. And for the first time, she truly understood the weight I had carried on my shoulders for so many years. We cried together, not tears of anguish, but of release and empathy. 6 months passed. Our relationship changed miraculously. No more awkward conversations, no more piled-up misunderstandings. We talked every day about everything from the small details of her job to my grand plans. On one beautiful Sunday morning, it was Rachel who suggested it. "Dad, can you take me to see your office today?" Not the one at home, your real workplace. I was surprised and overjoyed. I took her to the skyscraper in the city center where DT Enterprises was headquartered. As she stepped out of the elevator and saw the vast, modern office space with dozens of employees at work, I saw genuine awe in her eyes. I gave her a tour, introducing her to the department heads. "This is my daughter, Rachel," I said, with a pride I had never felt before. She no longer looked at my empire with resentment or strangeness. Instead, I saw curiosity, a sincere admiration. She asked intelligent questions about a project we were developing, listening intently as I explained. Finally, I led her to my office, a corner room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the entire city. We stood side by side, silently gazing at the buildings, the streams of traffic bustling below. "This is incredible, Dad," Rachel said softly. "You built all of this by yourself." "Not by myself," I replied, turning to smile at her. "I always had the greatest motivation right by my side." Rachel smiled back at me, a radiant, warm smile that I had missed so much. She told me about her plans, about a management course she wanted to take, about wanting to try her hand at her own business venture. She said that I was her biggest inspiration. Hearing those words, I had a realization. The recognition of the entire business world, the billion-dollar contracts, the skyscrapers. None of it could compare to my daughter's smile and understanding in this moment. I had spent my life building an empire of concrete and steel, but I finally understood that the greatest, most precious, and most enduring empire I would ever have was the love and the newly rebuilt relationship with my little princess. The storm had truly passed, and the sky was now clearer than ever before. Thank you for listening to the story until the end. If you've ever been through a similar situation or have any thoughts on this story, please share them in the comments so we can discuss them together. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next story.